Marshal Zhukov had witnessed the catastrophe of 1941, entire armies swallowed whole in days. He swore it would never happen again. In the summer of 1943, he was ready. 8 defensive lines stretched hundreds of kilometers deep into the Russian steppe, not built to slow the Germans, built to destroy them completely. The Wehrmacht was marching straight into the deadliest trap ever constructed, and they had absolutely no idea. 428 Zyklon standard text. She was barely 20 years old, working under direct shell fire, without sleep, with blood covering her hands, and no time to grieve the men she couldn't save. Soviet female medics kept the Red Army alive at Kursk. Thousands of casualties arrived every single hour. These women worked until they physically collapsed, then rose and worked again. History rarely speaks their names, but every soldier they saved carried their courage into the next battle. Farmers counted German tanks from the roadside. Railway workers noted every supply train passing through. Village elders drew enemy positions from memory alone. The Soviet intelligence network around Kursk was extraordinary, and it reached into every corner of occupied territory. By the time Operation Citadel finally launched on July 5th, the Red Army knew exactly where the blow was coming. They had spent months preparing a reception the Wehrmacht would never forget. Shells fell everywhere at Kursk. Aircraft struck without warning. There was no safe ground, not even far behind the lines. Soviet medics worked in open fields as the full fury of battle raged around them. Over 800,000 Soviet soldiers were lost on this killing ground. Every single number represents a human being, a son, a husband, a father. The medics fought for each one individually, one bandage, one breath, one heartbeat at a time against impossible odds. No name, no rank, no date of birth or death. Just a simple wooden cross driven into the Russian soil, one of hundreds of thousands scattered across this vast killing ground. These men came from farms and factories, from families who waited every day for letters that never arrived. This cross is not a symbol of glory or heroism. It is the true and unvarnished face of war, stripped completely bare, cold and utterly without mercy or meaning. Inside a tank at Kursk, unbearable heat, deafening noise, choking fumes, and the constant, suffocating knowledge that a single enemy shell could end everything in a fraction of a second. Tank crew life expectancy was measured in days, not weeks, days. Yet these men kept loading rounds, kept firing, kept trusting the eyes scanning the horizon above them. Fear was a luxury they could not afford. There was only the next round and the next target ahead. July 12th, Prokhorovka. Hundreds of tanks collided at point-blank range in one of the most savage and chaotic armored battles ever fought in the history of warfare. Soviet T-34s charged directly into Tigers, absorbing catastrophic losses deliberately to close the distance and negate superior German gun range. The field afterward was a vast graveyard of twisted, burning steel. Both sides claimed victory at Prokhorovka. But only the Germans retreated, and they never came back. The German offensive had finally stalled, broken against 8 layers of Soviet steel and blood. Now it was the Red Army's turn. Operations Kutuzov and Rumyantsev tore through exhausted Wehrmacht lines like a thunderbolt unleashed. Soldiers who had waited silently in trenches for weeks suddenly rose and advanced through smoke and wreckage. The momentum had shifted permanently, completely, and beyond any possibility of recovery. They would not stop until their flag flew over Berlin. The atmosphere at Soviet headquarters had transformed completely. No more desperate improvisation. No more plugging gaps with whatever units could be scraped together. These men now coordinated massive armored thrusts across hundreds of kilometers, simultaneously, with a precision that genuinely terrified German commanders. The Red Army of 1943 was simply not the disorganized force that had collapsed so catastrophically in the summer of 1941. It had become something far more dangerous. They had marched into the Soviet Union in 1941, convinced the war would be over in 6 weeks. 2 years later, they shuffled eastward as prisoners, exhausted, defeated, and stripped of everything they had believed in. For the German army, Kursk was the point of absolute no return, the last major offensive operation on the Eastern Front. After this crushing defeat, there was only retreat, slow and grinding at first, then desperate, then the final total collapse of everything. More than 90 artillery pieces per kilometer of front. That was the staggering density the Red Army achieved at Kursk, a concentration of firepower that had never been seen before in any war fought in the entire history of mankind. The opening Soviet barrage on July 5th struck German assembly areas before a single tank had moved forward. German commanders stood in stunned silence. Artillery was no longer a support weapon at Kursk. It had become the primary instrument of total annihilation. Every Allied soldier feared the Tiger tank. Its 88mm gun destroyed enemies at ranges no other tank could match. Its frontal armor was virtually impenetrable. But Tigers broke down constantly on the Russian steppe, consumed fuel at enormous rates, and were outnumbered 10-1 by Soviet armor. Red Army crews learned ruthlessly to target flanks and rear, where the armor was thinnest and most vulnerable. In the end, German technology lost decisively to Soviet numbers and iron determination. Church bells rang out for the first time in 2 agonizing years. Children poured into the streets, laughing and crying simultaneously. Old men wept openly without shame. Liberation had finally arrived. For these communities, the German occupation had meant public executions, brutal forced labor, and the deliberate starvation of entire villages. The maps told a story that could no longer be denied. Entire German army groups were being outmaneuvered simultaneously across hundreds of kilometers of front. Soviet deception operations, logistics networks, and air support moved in extraordinary coordination that shocked every German officer who witnessed it. Germany had not merely lost a battle at Kursk, it had permanently and irreversibly lost the ability to shape events on the Eastern Front. They had not slept in days, barely eaten, fought through brutal heat, choking dust, and relentless shellfire that never seemed to stop. Now they sat in silence, too utterly exhausted even to speak or move. They did not yet fully understand what they had achieved here. But history would record it with absolute clarity. These were the men who shattered the Wehrmacht at Kursk, and in doing so, they changed the course of the entire Second World War forever. In the catastrophic summer of 1941, Soviet tank brigades had collapsed completely for lack of basic radio communication. By 1943, that had changed beyond recognition. Radio coordination now allowed entire armored formations to react instantly to every shift on the battlefield. German commanders watched this dramatic transformation with growing alarm and disbelief. The army they had so effortlessly destroyed 2 years before had evolved into something disciplined, fast, and utterly ruthless. Orel, Belgorod, Kharkov, city after city fell through the long summer of 1943 as the Red Army drove westward without pause. Stalin ordered artillery salutes fired over Moscow to mark every single liberation. The Soviet people, who had endured 2 full years of catastrophic, almost unbearable loss, finally had genuine and undeniable reason to believe that victory was coming. After Kursk, it was no longer a distant hope whispered in darkness and despair. Everyone could feel it approaching now. August 1943, the Battle of Kursk was over. Germany had squandered its absolute final chance to change the outcome on the Eastern Front. Over. 2 million soldiers had fought across this vast and blood-soaked steppe, and the Soviet Union had emerged victorious. From this moment forward, the Red Army advanced without a single strategic defeat all the way to Berlin. Kursk was not merely a battle. It was the moment history rendered its final, irrevocable verdict on the Second World War.